I never believed in love. Love was for other girls, girls who were cooler and prettier than me. Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Mina. You might notice that I have a new light and a new microphone, which should mean that you can see and hear me better. Whether that's a good thing is up to you. Today I want to talk about a comic series called The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which came out between 1999 and 2007. It was written by Alan Moore of Watchmen, V for Vendetta fame, and illustrated by Kevin O'Neill. I talked a few weeks back about Dracula by Bram Stoker and how the women in that novel were portrayed as being sort of mentally ill, at least as it was understood as mental illness was understood in the Victorian era by means of vampirism. So vampirism was a sort of metaphor for mental illness in my analysis. Also present in Dracula is the idea of sexuality, and sexuality being dangerous, especially feminine sexuality or non-conforming heterosexuality. But all of those themes were very implicit in the original novel in Bram Stoker's Dracula. In The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, they go full force with this. They make the connection between sexuality and a vampire feeding, specifically non-consensual sexuality seems to be the implication, and a vampire feeding, much more explicit than in the original novel. In the first few panels, we meet Mina, who is referred to as Miss Murray, because she's been divorced. Unlike in the book, she was married. She was, her high status was assured by her marriage. She was protected from any fallout that she might have had from her encounter with Dracula. In the comic, she is explored as a solo woman, something that would not have been very acceptable in the Victorian era. So she doesn't have the protection of men. All the men who were so gung-ho about keeping her safe in Dracula have now abandoned her. And we are led to believe that this is because she was ravished by a foreigner, as Mr. Bond puts it. And here, a foreigner obviously refers to Dracula, and ravished refers to the sexual nature, especially the non-consensual sexual nature that I was talking about earlier that is explored as a clear interpretation of a vampire feeding. Mina in the original novel is a hard-working, middle-class Victorian woman. She is a symbol of the British Empire. And this is why the idea of her becoming ravished by a foreigner, becoming tainted by this sort of reverse colonization in a very physical and intimate way, is seen as the ultimate failure of the British Empire. Therefore, she must be excluded from society. What do I mean about reverse colonization? The British Empire at this point had been expanding for centuries. It was a saying that the sun never set on the British Empire, basically meaning that at any point of the 24-hour rotation of the Earth, there would be some territory of the British Empire that was in sunlight, because their territories were so vast and so spread around the globe. So obviously the British Empire prided itself in conquering other people, not in being conquered. So the idea of a foreigner coming in and taking what belonged to them was scary, really scary. And specifically the association between sexual conquest, especially of a non-consensual nature, with colonization is very clear in a lot of different texts. A lot of different examples of this exist. Dracula is one of them. So the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen makes this even more explicit. The British Empire in the Victorian era was led by Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria portrayed herself in photographs and paintings and that sort of thing as a hardworking mother and wife, more of a middle-class woman ideal than a noblewoman ideal, as previous queens had portrayed themselves, because the middle class was seen as the epitome of British society at this point in time during the Industrial Revolution. When capitalism was becoming more and more important, the middle class was more and more valued. So Victoria put on this image of being a hardworking middle class woman. So Mina, as a middle class woman, was even more a symbol of the Victorian British Empire. That's why she needed to be protected at all costs, and when that protection failed, she needed to be ostracized so that the purity and sovereignty of the British Empire could be preserved. So Mina in the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen no longer belongs to the middle class. She has been ostracized. However, she doesn't belong to the working class either, because she still conserves her middle class woman apparel and demeanor. She was still educated as a middle class woman, so she still preserves a lot of the markers of middle classness. She has everything except a name and a husband, which would put her within acceptable parameters of the middle class of the Victorian era. So Mina has an in-between outsider status within the comics because of her sexual deviance, as it was perceived. And this allows her, within the course of the first volume of the comics, to pass herself off as a member of classes that she doesn't belong to. She passes herself off as a lower class woman, as specifically as a prostitute. In order to do this, she dresses herself in a very revealing fashion, making herself available. Her lack of male accompaniment and the availability of her body are seen as class markers. She puts herself in even further risk in order to achieve passing within this class. What do I mean by further risk? I mean that there is risk inherent in her own outsider persona. In one of the first story beats, we see her going to try to recruit Captain Underpants. She's threatened by some of the locals in the place that she is visiting. She is at risk being herself because she doesn't have men to protect her. She doesn't have a status. But in this case, Quartermain saves her. When she chooses to take on the persona of a prostitute, she is purposefully making herself available and vulnerable. And this vulnerability is a class marker of the lower class, strongly tied to sexuality. All of the class markers are strongly tied to sexuality, as we will see in the next few minutes. Mina also passes herself off as a member of the middle class. She takes on the markers of middle classness that she lost, namely a husband, a fake husband in this case. She just pretends to be married. And she has Captain Nemo pose as her servant. So she has men who provide her status. And she also has a greater sexual safety, physical safety in this persona. But her sexuality is a big part of her class embodiment in this case. Since she pretends to be married, she's supposed to sleep in the same room as her husband, clearly indicating that her sexuality is still a big part of consideration of her class, even though it's safer and more private. But of course, she doesn't let anyone sleep in her bed because she's still at heart a proper middle-class Victorian woman. So if you read The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen after having read Dracula, you'll see that this Mina Murray has a lot more agency than the character in the original novel. And part of the reason why she might have more agency is specifically that she's not constricted by class expectations and class boundaries. She's been forced into an outsider status, so she's free to take on different personas. She's free to embody whatever aspects of the different classes are most useful to her at the moment. Different classes of women in Victorian England had different liberties and different restrictions. So by navigating through different class realities, Mina is able to attain greater freedom. But through all of this, her sexuality is constantly being monitored and called into question. It's a matter of constant scrutiny because it's so tied in with her class identity, even the class identities that she takes on as these different personas that she pretends to be that aren't actually her identity. But Mina also shows the fragility of these class markers because she's able to take them on even though they don't belong to her. She transcends class, and in doing so she transcends gender norms. Mina Murray is a really fascinating character, both in the original Dracula and in this reincarnation, because she represents so much of what femininity, and specifically middle class femininity, meant in the Victorian era, and how that related to the empire, sovereignty, sexuality, colonialism, a bunch of different things that are embedded in Victorian society. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know if there's a specific topic you want me to address in one of my future videos, or if you have any recommendations for books I should read. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and subscribe. I post new video essays every Wednesday. I'll see you next week. I never believed in love. Love was forever.